Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJ Muir. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Hey, thanks, Jim.
Stewart, if we have billionaires blasting off into outer space just for fun, how long before they take a drilling rig or a mining outfit with them and land on the moon to extract resources there?
Yeah, well, we've seen this summer has become the summer of love for the billionaires rocketing into space. And even though they're not going that far into space, it is getting people thinking about the possibilities out there. You know, I've heard mentions of mining asteroids. Sounds to me like pure science fiction, that kind of thing. But recently, I've been hearing about mining on the moon, which actually, once you look into the details of it, it's not quite as far-fetched as you might think.
Well, scenarios I've seen, you actually launch stuff into space using a big ramp, using electromagnets, so you don't have to expend any rocket fuel, a rail gun, in effect, so that puts it in the right direction. And they could be sending stuff from the moon here, and you would need much less energy because it's 1/6 the gravity. What do you think they would find on the moon worth to send back to Earth, though? It still would be expensive.
Well, what's interesting is that sending it back to Earth isn't necessarily the immediate outcome, because there's another problem to solve before you can do that, if it's possible to do that, and that is sustaining human life. So up until now, if you look at long-term habitation of space by humans, well, that's been the International Space Station. What if the moon had an international moon station that was, you know, similar to the ISS, but it was on the moon? And if you did that, what advantages might there be to being on the surface of a planet made of rock, or rock and bits of rock that have fallen onto it? Well, that rock is made up of a lot of oxides. If you can extract the oxygen from those oxides, and that's about 40% of the mass of the moon, that is oxides that could be extracted, you then, of course, have that most essential element for human life. And then you're not carting your oxygen into space or having to make it through chemical processes. You've got it right there. Of course, you have to extract it from the oxides, and that could be energy intensive. There's all sorts of issues there, but it is there. It does have oxygen. And if you can add hydrogen to that oxygen and you can create something called H2O, you've fulfilled another basic requirement of human life from mining on the planet. So on the moon. And this is quite an intriguing concept. I mean, it might be that mining in space is sooner than we think.
Now, of course, we talk about natural resource development here in British Columbia. What kind of an impact would that have on the BC resource industries, or would that just be a supplement?
Well, I think one of the things we sometimes overlook about the resource industries in BC and Canada is that we have a huge amount of brain power. It's not just muscle power of machines and digging things. It's the people at our universities, at BCIT, in the private sector who are providing mining services, not just in BC, but around the world. So you've got some of the top brains in the world here. They not only live and work in Vancouver, but they come to Vancouver during Roundup, the big conference in January, where there's thousands of mining experts, exploration people from all over the place. You know, Vancouver tends to forget, because it spends so much time admiring its beauty itself, maybe, that it is a world powerhouse of mining knowledge. So I would think that if there's something in the way of mining that happens whether at the bottom of the sea or in space, there's going to be some Vancouver expertise that's involved in it.
And speaking of the bottom of the sea, they found some nodules of mineral-rich substances in very deep parts of the ocean that they think they could recover as well. Would BC be involved in that?
Yes, I've actually met some mining entrepreneurs who are involved in this very space, and yeah, I mean, depending on the formation and the way in which those nodules have been placed and how accessible they are, it's not even mining in the sense that you don't have to dig down. You just need to get down there and find a way to simply remove those nodules that may be simply sitting on the bottom of the ocean. So it then becomes a different question. It becomes, how do we get down there such that we can bring those up and do it in an environmentally sustainable way, and then you have potentially a very, very large amount of these minerals.
Whenever you do something in the ocean, people are worried about the environment there. Could it be recovered without disturbing the sea life that lives down there? Or is there a lot to disturb?
Well, yes, there's not too much there. I mean, the middle levels of ocean, we've been finding out more and more recently about actually just how much life there is there. It may not look like life as we know it. There's some very weird creatures down there, but that's their space and they're there. So if we're going to be operating in those areas, I think everyone will be mindful of it. But we do have some legislative gaps in this, particularly where we're talking about international waters where you have maybe some conventions, but most countries out there, when it comes to fishing, say, who has confidence that our international fishing rules are protecting the oceans from overfishing? I don't think they're protecting the oceans from the ghost nets of fish boats that have lost their nets that are just floating around for potentially many, many years, killing wildlife. It's reprehensible, but it's happening. So can mining occur without it being the Wild West? I think that's going to be an absolute necessity. We need to have international clout to make sure that there's no bad actors who are despoiling the unseen but pristine ocean bottom.
Doesn't fishing gear have to be made biodegradable so that ocean-borne bacteria and sunlight can deteriorate these things over time? Because we're seeing countless videos now of whales having to be cut free of fishing gear. Yeah, well,
I'm sure there are those regulations, but the fact of the matter is we do have these problems where clearly the tackle is causing that problem. I was just reading about the Sea of Marmara, which is adjacent to Istanbul, which is a growing city. The Turkish economy is growing quickly. They're industrializing, and they're doing so without any regard for the environment. One of the many problems they have in that sea, which used to be just a paradise, alive with reefs and exotic fish and whales, is this problem of fishing nets that have been lost and are creating all sorts of havoc. So it's a very real problem today.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, what's the latest with politics and BC Forestry?
Yes, well, there's a new episode of Politics Explained. It's on Facebook. We just search Politics Explained. You'll see this series. It's a Made in BC series by Aaron Gunn. He's looked at forestry. He interviewed a number of professional foresters, people who understand what's going on in the woods. He also interviewed me, and I gave him some of my thoughts from my research on forestry in BC. I mean, you've got the headlines we see about old growth, logging, and opposition to that. What are the implications of this? I think what we've seen, though, is even where journalists are trying to tell the story of what's actually going on, it tends to get overwhelmed by a lot of the very noisy, one-sided activism of people saying, no, you can't have forestry, we can't have forest communities, we can't have First Nations involved in the forest economy. You've got this recent rising up of these anti-forestry voices. It's not just that forestry is important in the BC economy. I mean, it's massively important. If it was only that, I don't think that would necessarily justify having the forest industry. But the fact that we have such a beneficial industry that is also our most sustainable, it regrows. I mean, the stewardship of public lands and private lands where there is forestry today is not done better anywhere else in the world. You might think from so much of the news coverage you see that it's some terrible situation, but in fact, I mean, I'm talking to you from Port Alberni today on Vancouver Island. I've been out looking at some of the forests, some of the replanting, some of the succession of forestry activities over decades and decades, and it's so impressive what we're doing here. We hear about climate and forestry. What's really going on there, I think, is that as we see mature forests that can be harvested, that wood goes into products that lock up the carbon for a long time, and then new trees are planted that, because they grow quickly, they suck up more CO2 from the atmosphere, which is a good thing, of course. And if you can do that cycle of life, you can have the circular economy that everyone wants to have. And I think forestry is one of the best examples of how we could be in that in BC today. So the Politics Explained video, I think, does a really good job of taking some of these voices who are science-based and responsible, who are involved in conservation measures, to actually explain what does happen, because it doesn't seem to be getting out there too much. I think too many of the messages we're hearing about it are simply not based in science, or they're from particular pressure groups that want to see an outcome. I think that we can have not only the extremely large portion of BC that is protected from any sort of human activity, including forestry, but we can also have parts of the forest that are a component of the renewable forest industry that allows First Nations to have an economy on their territories. Right now, it's very hard if you're a First Nations leader in a remote or non-urban part of British Columbia to develop a local economy so that you can pay for local services and help your kids to learn their language so they're prouder of their culture and they have, higher self-esteem and better lives. Forestry is one of the most important industries that they have access to do that. So if you're, truly compassionate and caring about people and the environment, I think forestry is part of the answer to that. So that's why I'd recommend checking out that video.
Is there a way to do more selective logging? Because right now everything's clear cut. It takes forever for that forest to come back. It's monoculture. It's not really a forest. It's just a tree farm. Is there a way to make it more natural and yet still sustainable?
Well, what I see today happening, you have new practices. I mean, clear cut is a term that for British Columbians, certainly those of a certain age, like you and me, Jim, we relate that back to those days of probably 30, 40 years ago and earlier, where clear cuts were these immense areas of everything in sight is raised. They still use the term clear cut, but as it's used today, it applies to these very small pockets of forest where they have carve-outs, where they don't cut by the streams, where they have identified wildlife habitat, maybe it's bear dens, maybe it's particular species they want to protect, where they have made sure that they're not, cutting down every tree in sight. They've got these very carefully, surgically designed profiles, contours for what they're allowing to be cut. I mean, this is all regulated by the government. I counted 106 different steps you have to go through, bureaucratic hurdles that have to be cleared before a single tree can be cut by a forest company. I mean, these forests are all protected. And I think the replanting is, there may be cases where that plantation style exists, but you can certainly go to many, many parts of BC, and you can find second growth forest that has been managed by humans for the purpose of long-term forestry success. And these are mixed forests where they have multiple species. So, it can be done very well. And it's not to say that it's all hunky-dory. I mean, there was a recent process on what is the way to future-proof the industry and make sure that it's going to be there for the long term. And there's a lot of tough questions. I mean, it's not a simple thing, but I think there is often a lot of good things happening that are not so easy to see.
You just published an article on Canada's standard of living. Is it going up? Is it going down? What's the future of our standard of living?
Well, I think right now we're probably all experiencing a pretty good quality of life. Where I'm concerned is the future. And it's not just me. There was an interesting paper by former head of the BC Public Service. This is someone who came in with the BC NDP and served in that role until last fall before the BC election. Someone with a lot of experience in business, a Harvard economist by the name of Don Wright. He published a paper in Public Policy Forum. I don't know if everyone's a policy wonk and is going to dive into it, but if you want to, it's called Rhetoric versus Results, Shaping Policy to Benefit Canada's Middle Class at the Public Policy Forum. And I've written an article actually about this because it's so interesting. The idea, as Don Wright says, that governments need to commit fundamentally to raising the standard of living of the broad middle class as a core permanent objective. That's one perspective on what the purpose of government is. That's why you're there, people in government. It's not to stop opportunities or prevent people from having access to a good standard of living. And here's a challenge for them. Don Wright is saying that Canadians should expect that each generation has roughly double the standard of living of the preceding generation. I mean, that means different things to different people, I think, but what are the conditions necessary? And the way he puts it, I mean, it's not encouraging right now, frankly. He's saying until governments can begin to put this thinking at the center of what they do, they're going to continue to offer up what he cheekily calls Costco samples to the middle class, where what those people really want, desperately want, is a full course meal. So everyone is getting a sample of it. They might be able to, drive through a nice neighborhood, but can they afford a house there? Well, no, they're just getting a sample of it. Recently, I was further concerned. I saw a phrase, it's called just transition. That's drawn directly from the hard left wing, the kind of eco-socialist movements, Green New Deal, and that kind of thing we've been hearing about in recent years, not being kind of out there in that area of ideas that we maybe need to understand a little better, but rather the federal government is installing that idea as the centerpiece of Canadian economic policy. And as I've said in my post at ResourceWorks on this topic, in the immortal words of Gina Davis in the movie The Fly, be afraid, be very afraid. Right now, Jim, our standard of living as a country, it depends on our ability to sell goods and services to the rest of the world, right? I mean, that's the way that we acquire the things we want, like iPhones or orange juice that we can't make ourselves or don't make enough of ourselves, like vaccines or industrial robots. We need trade to do that. We trade things we have. And what do we have? Like 50% of our goods and exports are from natural resource areas. So the just transition idea, which the federal government is embracing, is just shorthand for reducing the natural resource economy and having fewer natural resource exports. But that translates directly to a reduced standard of living. And that's why this is important. It's not just, policy wonk stuff for economists. It's something that will affect all of us. So I'm never wanting to be the one who's just sort of ranting and negative about things. I want to have a solution. And there is a solution. We can, if we focus on the things we can do that are within our power, instead of being, transfixed by these bright, shiny objects. Someone says, go over and do this, and it's not necessarily authentic. We should stay with the things that are working today. We need to build on the things we have. And if they're not all we want them to be. I mean, energy is a great example of that. If you look at the oil and gas sector, it's really a significant driver of the whole economy. If we get rid of it, which is what the Just Transition campaign is about, we are getting rid of the chance to grow it and stretch it and evolve it and make it an innovation contributor, which it already is, but it needs to be more of one. But taking away the opportunity to be an innovator is a really bad idea if you think that having a high quality of life is important.
You're involved with something called Tursa Clean. What is it? What does it do, and what's its potential?
Well, a lot of what we're hearing about when it comes to mining right now is the problems of mines, particularly around managing mining waste, not just the existence of tailings ponds and potential risk. I mean, everyone in this day and age knows about things that have happened in Brazil, even in British Columbia with Mount Poly, and they associate tailings ponds with this kind of risk. And yet at the same time, we know that it's only with more minerals and metals that can be produced that there can be a clean energy sector where we can have electric vehicles and things like that contribute to lowered climate risk. So there's no question we need to have those products out there. The problem is, how do we scale up the amount of production? There's far more of it than you can even imagine when you consider all of the things that need to be electrified that are currently based on fossil fuels. So if we're genuine in this, with a team of scientists from UBC led by Vikram Yadav, who's a world changer, his last idea was in biological engineering, and it's now backed by Bill Gates through a company called Alonia. But Vikram, he started Metabolic out of UBC to spin off his brilliant ideas. And I was talking with him recently. He says waste is a failure of the imagination. And Tursa Clean, which is the process that we're developing, applies the power of synthetic biology tools to create a pollution-free world. That's his vision. And here's another way he puts it. He says we're supersizing what Mother Nature already does naturally. So this is about just simply, it's about cleaning up the mining wastewater, which is a big issue. And in particular, when you have acid rock drainage occur, which happens with all kinds of different mining types and in places. There's some parts of the world where it's a bigger problem than others. We have acid rock drainage issues right at home in British Columbia. But with this multi-step flow-based process, you're kind of taking and enhancing these natural processes using protein engineering and cell design to develop microbial and enzymatic solutions that act much as Mother Nature does, but as I say, in a more targeted way. So for different profiles, you can evolve different design solutions that will allow there to be the amount of mineral production and metal production in the world that we need. It's pretty exciting. This idea has been talked about for a long time, but Vikram is really the only scientist who has developed the actual tools and applied them to this space to do something. And we'll be setting up a laboratory in Burnaby later this month in August, and it will be the place where the commercial scaling is done for it. So there's a considerable amount of interest in this. Recently, the USA-Canada joint process on critical minerals has identified the issues around scaling up mining, and this is part of the solution. So it's pretty exciting to see something homegrown like this actually quickly start to be recognized as part of this big global change that we're going through.
Would this take some of the rare earth monopoly away from China?
China's got 70% of rare earth production. They don't want to let go of it. They have created a very dirty, environmentally hazardous process, and I think it's going to be very challenging for the countries that have rare earth deposits. I mean, Canada does. We have a significant amount. We're not one of the giants, but we're definitely we've got the potential to be a player. And because these are so resource intensive to develop, yes, we definitely do think that depending on the the particular element being mined, if it's one that the process can be applied to, I mean, not everything, but a great many different minerals can be extracted more successfully using this process, then absolutely. So we could flatten the barriers to the rare earth mining sector being developed in Canada, and there's lots and lots of people working in that space.
And using microbes to help process things, 90% of the Earth's biomass is below the surface of the Earth. It's buried in the Earth. It's deep down there. We have bacterium that can eat and dissolve spilled oil in the ocean. So would this be an expansion of that kind of technology?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you're on the right track there, because there has been, you'll mention to people in mining the process of using microbes, and people will say, oh, yeah, bugs, using bugs in mining waste remediation. It's been around for a long time. Lots of things have been tried. What's happened recently is that the development of protein engineering and cell design has given almost a precision control to scientists in designing the exact type of solution in the lab. So, we're going to be designing the solutions for the particular profile. So you will take the wastewater or the material from a particular mine with its own specific geological fingerprint, and then design an exact solution tailored to that, because it requires that kind of thing. So this is a very significant advance made possible by the same technology that is allowed in the space of barely a year for multiple vaccines to be developed. And in fact, Professor Yadav, who is the founder of Tursa Earth, he was collaborating on the development of COVID vaccines during the pandemic, because it's drawn from that same area of expertise.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
It's always a pleasure, Jim. Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. Find him on Twitter at SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, we'll gladly ask that question on your behalf if you send it to info@housestreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at House Street. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.